Imagine hearing your sister-in-law call your family trash during your wedding ceremony in front of 300 stunned guests and your 8-year-old flower girl. For Eleanor, this wasn't hypothetical, it was reality. When her flower girl's mother publicly insulted her during the processional, most people would have caused a scene or abandoned the ceremony entirely. But our guest chose strategy instead. I'm Eliza, and today on Wedding Day Justice, we're exploring how Eleanor transformed this public humiliation into a masterclass on dignity when her sister-in-law discovered who the Blackwood family really was, and why patience can be the most devastating response to prejudice.
Thank you, Eliza. I'm sharing this story because I believe how we respond to cruelty shapes not just our own character, but impacts the next generation. My flower girl Sophie deserved to see grace under pressure rather than petty revenge. Let me tell you what happened. I never wanted my family's wealth to define me. Growing up as Eleanor Hayes Miller, granddaughter of Richard Hayes, founder of Hayes Industries and one of the wealthiest men in our city, I'd seen how money changed the way people treated you. How they'd smile a little wider, laugh a little louder at your jokes, and suddenly find you fascinating when they learned your net worth. So when I met Daniel at a volunteer event for the Children's Hospital, I introduced myself simply as Ellie. No last name, no family connection, just a woman in jeans and a t-shirt helping to paint murals for sick kids. Daniel was there with his architectural firm, which had donated design services. He had kind eyes, a genuine laugh, and didn't seem to care that my auburn hair was splattered with blue paint by the end of the day. When he asked for my number, I hesitated. I'd been burned before by men who'd Googled me after learning my full name and suddenly became very interested in meeting my family. But something about Daniel felt different. He looked at me, really looked at me, not threw me to the fortune behind me. "Ellie," I said when he asked my name again, "just Ellie for now." He smiled. "Well, just Ellie, I'd love to take you to dinner sometime." I agreed, and our relationship blossomed naturally. I told him I worked in philanthropy, which was true. I ran the Hayes Foundation, though I let him assume I was just an employee. I drove my modest Volvo to our dates rather than any of the luxury cars in my garage. I wore my grandmother's turquoise pendant rather than the diamonds gathering dust in my safe. 6 months in, when things were getting serious, I knew I needed to tell him the truth. We were walking along the riverfront when I finally gathered my courage. "Daniel, there's something I need to tell you about my family," I began. He squeezed my hand. "If you're worried about me meeting them, don't be. I'm sure they're wonderful just like you." "It's not that," I said, my heart pounding. "My full name is Eleanor Hayes Miller. My grandfather is Richard Hayes." I watched his face, waiting for the recognition, the shift in his expression that I'd seen so many times before. But Daniel just looked at me blankly. "I'm sorry, should I know that name?" I laughed, partly from relief and partly from genuine amusement. Daniel had moved to our city only a year ago for work and apparently hadn't yet absorbed the local who's who. Hayes Industries, the Hayes building downtown, the Hayes Foundation. Slowly, I watched understanding dawn on his face. "Wait, your family owns half the city." "Not half," I corrected, "but a significant portion, yes." He was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then he shook his head and smiled. "Well, that explains why you always insist on splitting the check even when I try to pay." "You're not upset I didn't tell you sooner." "Ellie," he said, taking both my hands, "I fell in love with you, not your bank account. Though I admit I'm a little intimidated about meeting your family now." "Don't be," I assured him. "My parents are down to earth. My mother's a retired teacher, and my father runs the business side of things but would rather be fishing. My grandfather's the intimidating one, but he'll love you once he sees how happy you make me." And they did. My parents welcomed Daniel warmly. My grandfather, after a predictably stern inspection and interrogation about Daniel's 5-year plan, gave his gruff approval. "He looks at you, not your name," he told me privately. "That's rare, Eleanor. Don't let him go." I didn't intend to. When Daniel proposed a year later, on the same riverfront where I'd revealed my identity, I said yes without hesitation. We agreed on a wedding that would blend our families and cultures, honoring my Filipino heritage from my mother's side and incorporating elements of both our traditions. We decided to pay for everything ourselves, despite my family's offers to help. Daniel was proud and wanted to contribute equally, and I respected that. We chose the historic Riverside Gardens for our venue, a beautiful property with lush grounds and a view of the water. It wasn't the most expensive venue in town, but it was meaningful to us. We'd volunteered there together for a garden restoration project. Everything was falling into place beautifully until I met Daniel's sister, Vanessa, at our engagement dinner. She arrived late, dressed impeccably in designer clothes that still had a hint of the tags showing, and immediately sized me up with a cool, appraising look. "So you're Ellie," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Daniel's told us so much about you, though he never mentioned your background." I felt Daniel tense beside me. "Vanessa," he warned. "What?" she said with an artificial laugh. "I'm just getting to know my future sister-in-law. What did you say your family does again, Ellie?" "My father's in business," I said simply, "and my mother was a teacher before she retired." "How quaint," Vanessa replied, her voice dripping with condescension. "And where did you grow up? Daniel mentioned something about the East Side." The East Side of our city was known for its diversity and working-class neighborhoods, perfectly lovely areas, but clearly not what Vanessa considered acceptable. "My family has a home there, yes," I said carefully. It was true we maintained a residence in that neighborhood for my grandmother, who refused to leave the community she'd lived in for 60 years, even after my grandfather's business took off. Daniel changed the subject, but throughout dinner, I caught Vanessa studying me, her expression calculating. Later, Daniel apologized profusely. "I'm sorry about my sister. Vanessa's always been status conscious. Our parents worked hard to give us opportunities, and somewhere along the way, she decided that meant we needed to marry up." "It's okay," I assured him. "She doesn't know who I am, and honestly, I'd prefer to keep it that way until after the wedding." "Are you sure?" I nodded. "I want her to get to know me for me, not for my family name." Daniel looked doubtful. "Vanessa doesn't make that easy. She judges everyone." "Then let her judge," I said. "It won't change anything between us." Little did I know how much I would come to regret that decision, or how spectacularly it would backfire when Vanessa's true colors emerged at our wedding. The trouble began in earnest when Vanessa volunteered to be our wedding coordinator. "I have such an eye for these things," she insisted over brunch 3 months before our wedding date. "And I know all the best vendors in the city. You two are so busy with work, let me handle the details." Daniel glanced at me uncertainly. We'd already hired a professional planner, a lovely woman named Myra who had been wonderfully respectful of our vision and budget. "That's really generous, Vanessa," I said carefully, "but we've already hired someone." "Oh, who?" she asked, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her mimosa glass. "Myra Patel," Daniel told her. Vanessa's nose wrinkled slightly. "Myra? Oh, honey, no. She did my friend Stephanie's wedding and it was a disaster. The flowers were wilting, the cake was late. You can't trust her." I knew for a fact that Myra had an impeccable reputation. I'd personally attended 3 events she'd coordinated, including a major fundraising gala for the Hayes Foundation. "We've seen her work," I said firmly. "We're very confident in her abilities." "Well, I suppose if you're going for something simple," Vanessa said with a dismissive wave. "But Daniel deserves the best for his big day. The Millers have a certain standard to maintain." I felt Daniel's hand tight around mine under the table. "Our wedding will be exactly what we want it to be," he said, an edge to his voice I rarely heard. "And Ellie and I are paying for it ourselves, so the Miller standard isn't relevant." Vanessa looked genuinely shocked. "You're paying? But why?" I thought. She stopped herself, glancing at me with poorly disguised disdain. "Well, I just assumed Mom and Dad would contribute, as is traditional." "We want to do this on our own," Daniel said firmly. "How independent of you," Vanessa replied, her tone making it clear she thought it was anything but admirable. "Well, at least let me help with the guest list. There are certain people who simply must be invited, connections that will be valuable to you professionally, Daniel." Thus began Vanessa's campaign to take over our wedding planning. Despite our clear boundaries, she managed to insinuate herself into nearly every decision. She'd call vendors directly, claiming to be authorized to make changes. She'd corner Daniel's parents, convincing them to pressure us about various elements. And most frustratingly, she'd find ways to exclude me from conversations, referring to Miller family traditions that apparently couldn't be broken. One afternoon, I arrived at the florist to find Vanessa already there, reviewing our arrangements. "These centerpieces won't do at all," she was saying as I walked in. "They're so pedestrian. Daniel's family expects something more substantial." "Actually," I interrupted, "those are exactly what we wanted. Simple, elegant arrangements that won't block conversation across the table." Vanessa turned, her surprise quickly masked by a tight smile. "Ellie, I was just helping to upgrade a few elements. These tiny arrangements look like something from a diner, not a Miller wedding." "They're hand-selected garden roses and native wildflowers," I pointed out, "specifically chosen because they're sustainable and locally grown." "Wildflowers," she repeated, as if I'd suggested decorating with weeds. "How rustic, but surely for Daniel's sake, you'd want something more elegant? Unless budget is a concern." She let the implication hang in the air. "The budget is fine," I said evenly. "These flowers are our preference, and they're staying." The florist, clearly uncomfortable, nodded quickly. "Of course, Ms. Miller, I mean Ms. Hayes," I supplied. I'd been using my mother's maiden name for wedding arrangements to maintain my privacy. "And thank you for understanding." As we left the shop, Vanessa linked her arm through mine in a gesture that felt more restraining than friendly. "Ellie, dear, I know you're trying your best with this wedding, but you have to understand, the Millers have certain connections in the city. People will be judging every detail." "The only people whose opinions matter to me are Daniel's and mine," I replied. She patted my hand condescendingly. "That's sweet, naive but sweet. Trust me, in our social circle, these things matter. Daniel might not say it, but he notices these things too." "Daniel and I have discussed every detail of this wedding," I said firmly. "He's happy with our choices." "Of course he says that to you," she smiled. "He's being kind, but a man in his position has expectations, even if he's too polite to voice them." I pulled my arm away. "I think I know what Daniel wants better than you do." "Do you?" Her smile sharpened. "Because I've known him his entire life. I know the world he comes from, the people who matter to our family. Can you say the same?" Before I could respond, she checked her watch and gasped theatrically. "Oh, look at the time. I'm late for lunch with the Andersons. You know Judge Anderson? His wife is on the hospital board with me. Must dash." She air-kissed my cheek and was gone, leaving me seething on the sidewalk. That evening, I told Daniel about the encounter. His face darkened as I recounted Vanessa's words. "I'm so sorry," he said, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "I'll talk to her again." "This is the third time you've had to talk to her," I pointed out. "It's not working, Daniel." "I know," he sighed heavily. "Maybe we should just tell her who you really are. That might shut her up." I was tempted, so tempted, but something held me back. "No, I don't want to give her the satisfaction. And honestly, would you really want her to suddenly start treating me well only because of my family name?" "Of course not," he admitted, "but I hate seeing her disrespect you like this." "Let's just get through the wedding," I said. "After that, we can set whatever boundaries we need to." Vanessa's interference only escalated as the wedding approached. She convinced the venue coordinator to move our ceremony time an hour earlier, claiming we'd requested it, which conflicted with our photographer's schedule. She tried to change our menu from the Filipino-American fusion we'd carefully selected to what she called more appropriate fare. And most hurtfully, she somehow managed to replace our chosen flower girl, the daughter of Daniel's childhood best friend, with her own daughter, Sophie. "But we promised Lily," Daniel protested when we discovered the switch. "She's been practicing for months." "Sophie is family," Vanessa countered when confronted. "Surely you understand that blood comes first? Besides, Sophie will do a much better job. She's been taking poise classes since she was 3. I watched Daniel's best friend Mark try to explain to his tearful daughter why she wouldn't be in Uncle Daniel's wedding after all. My heart broke for the little girl, and I nearly called the whole thing off then and there. Instead, we created a special role for Lily as a junior bridesmaid with her own special duties. It wasn't the same, but it helped soothe the hurt. Mark, however, gave Vanessa a wide berth after that, his usual friendly demeanor noticeably cooler. As our wedding day approached, I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake in keeping my identity secret. But I'd come too far to back down now. And despite everything, I truly believed that once we were married, once the stress of the wedding was behind us, things would improve with Vanessa. I had no idea that she was saving her most vicious behavior for the wedding day itself, or that her final attempt to assert her perceived superiority would backfire so spectacularly. The evening before our wedding, we gathered at the Harbor View, an upscale restaurant overlooking the bay, for our rehearsal dinner. The private room glowed with soft lighting, white orchids adorned each table, and floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the sunset, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. It should have been perfect. I wore a simple ivory sheath dress with my grandmother's turquoise pendant and a pair of pearl earrings that had belonged to Daniel's grandmother, his mother's gift to me that morning. My auburn hair was swept into a loose updo, and Daniel couldn't stop smiling when he saw me. "You look beautiful," he whispered, pressing a kiss to my temple as we greeted guests. The first hint of trouble came when I noticed the seating arrangement had been changed. Originally, we'd planned to seat my parents with Daniel's at the central table. Instead, I found my parents relegated to a side table with distant relatives, while Vanessa and her husband occupied the seats beside Daniel's parents. "Did you approve this change?" I asked Daniel quietly. He frowned, scanning the room. "Absolutely not. Let me fix it." Before he could, Vanessa intercepted us, resplendent in a designer gown that probably cost more than our entire rehearsal dinner. "There's the happy couple," she trilled, air-kissing us both. "Ellie, that dress is sweet, very appropriate for your first fancy dinner, I'm sure." I felt Daniel tense beside me. "Vanessa," he began, but she was already continuing. "I took the liberty of adjusting the seating chart," she said. "I realized we had the Andersons coming, you know, the judge, and they really should be at a prominent table. I hope you don't mind, but I moved a few people around." "Actually, we do mind," Daniel said firmly. "Please return the seating to our original plan." Vanessa's smile didn't falter, but her eyes hardened. "Oh, it's much too late for that. Everyone's already been informed of their tables. We can't possibly change it now without creating confusion." "Vanessa," Daniel's voice dropped lower, a warning in his tone. "It's fine," I interrupted, placing a calming hand on Daniel's arm. "It's just one dinner. Let's not make a scene." Daniel looked at me, clearly conflicted, but finally nodded. "This is the last time," he told his sister firmly. "No more changes without our explicit approval." "Of course, darling brother," she said sweetly. "Now come say hello to the Prestons. They've been asking about you." As she led Daniel away, I made my way to my parents' table to explain the situation. My father, dignified in his tuxedo, merely raised an eyebrow. "Interesting strategy," he mused, "keeping your identity quiet even now." "Just until tomorrow," I promised. "After the ceremony, everyone will know." My mother squeezed my hand. "You've always done things your own way, Anak. We trust your judgment." The dinner progressed with the typical toasts and well wishes. Daniel's father raised a glass to us, his speech warm and welcoming. My father followed with his own toast, his words carefully measured to avoid revealing too much about our family. Then Vanessa stood, tapping her glass delicately for attention. "I'd like to say a few words about my only brother and his bride," she announced, her voice carrying across the room. I felt a flutter of anxiety. We hadn't planned for Vanessa to give a toast. "Daniel has always been the golden boy of our family," she began. "Smart, hardworking, destined for greatness. Our parents sacrificed everything to put him through the best schools, to give him every advantage." She smiled at her parents, who beamed back at her. "Which is why it came as such a surprise when he brought home Ellie," she continued, turning her gaze to me. "Such a modest girl from such a humble background." The room grew uncomfortably quiet. I felt Daniel's hand find mine under the table, squeezing reassuringly. "But love is blind, they say," Vanessa continued with a tight smile. "And who are we to question where the heart leads, even if it's not the path we might have chosen?" She raised her glass higher. "To Daniel and Ellie, may your life together be exactly what you deserve." The toast was met with awkward, scattered applause. Daniel's mother looked mortified, while his father's expression had hardened into something unreadable. My parents exchanged a glance I knew well, the one that said they were counting to 10 before responding. Before anyone could salvage the moment, another voice spoke up. "I'd like to add something if I may." Heads turned as Dr. Chen, chief of surgery at the Children's Hospital and a respected figure in the community, rose from his seat at a nearby table. He was an unexpected addition to our guest list. Daniel's firm had recently completed a major redesign of the hospital's oncology wing, and we'd invited him as a courtesy. I hadn't expected him to attend. "I've had the pleasure of working with Ellie for several years now," Dr. Chen said, his voice warm but authoritative. "And while I don't know much about what constitutes a humble background, I can tell you that her character is anything but modest. Her compassion, intelligence, and dedication to helping others is unparalleled." Vanessa's smile froze on her face as Dr. Chen continued. "Daniel is indeed fortunate to have found someone of Ellie's caliber," he said. "In my experience, true worth is measured not by the circumstances of one's birth, but by the impact of one's actions. And by that measure, Ellie is exceptional." He raised his glass. "To Daniel and Ellie, may your marriage be built on the solid foundation of mutual respect and shared values that I've observed between you." "Hear, hear," called several voices, and this time the applause was genuine and enthusiastic. Vanessa remained standing, her expression a mixture of confusion and annoyance as her moment was overshadowed. Slowly, she sank back into her seat. As dinner concluded and guests began to mingle, I made my way to Dr. Chen to thank him. "That was very kind of you," I said quietly. He smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "Not kind, truthful, and perhaps a bit self-indulgent. I've wanted to put that woman in her place since she tried to have my parking space reassigned to her husband at the hospital fundraiser last year." I laughed despite myself. "Still, I appreciate it." "Your secret is safe until tomorrow," he assured me, his voice low. "Though I admit I'm looking forward to the revelation. Some lessons are best learned publicly." As guests began to depart, Vanessa cornered me near the coat check, her smile brittle. "That was quite the performance from Dr. Chen," she said. "I didn't realize you were so connected." "There's a lot you don't know about me," I replied evenly. "Clearly," her eyes narrowed. "Though I wonder what the good doctor would think if he knew you were deceiving my brother about your background." My pulse quickened. "Excuse me." "Please," she scoffed. "I did some digging. There's no record of any Hayes family of note in the East Side neighborhood you claim to be from. In fact, there's barely any record of you at all before you met Daniel. It's all very convenient." "I'm not sure what you're implying," I said carefully. "I think you know exactly what I'm implying," Vanessa hissed, dropping all pretense of civility. "You've created this persona to trap my brother. God knows what your real background is, but I will find out, Ellie, or whatever your name really is. And when I do, Daniel will see you for what you really are." Before I could respond, Daniel appeared at my side. "Everything okay here?" "Perfectly fine," Vanessa said, her pleasant mask sliding back into place. "Just giving Ellie some last-minute advice for tomorrow, sister to sister." She kissed Daniel's cheek. "Get some rest, brother dear. Tomorrow's a big day." As she walked away, Daniel turned to me. "What was that really about?" I hesitated, then decided to tell him the truth. "She thinks I'm hiding something. She's been investigating me." Daniel's expression darkened. "That's crossing a line." "It's okay," I assured him. "Let her investigate. Tomorrow, everyone will know the truth anyway." "Are you sure you still want to wait? We could just tell her now, end all this nonsense." I considered it for a moment. Part of me wanted to march right up to Vanessa and reveal exactly who I was to see the shock and embarrassment on her face. But another part, the part that had been raised to take the higher road, held back. "No," I decided. "Let's stick to the plan. Tomorrow, after we're officially married, the mayor will make the announcement during his toast, as we arranged." Daniel nodded, though he still looked troubled. "If that's what you want. But Ellie, I'm sorry about all of this. You shouldn't have to endure Vanessa's behavior." "It's just one more day," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "What more can she possibly do?" As it turned out, Vanessa had one final act of cruelty planned. one that would take place at the worst possible moment, in front of everyone we loved. My wedding day dawned clear and perfect, with just enough breeze to rustle the willow trees at Riverside Gardens without threatening the elaborate setup. I woke in the bridal suite, surrounded by my closest friends and my mother, feeling a mix of excitement and lingering anxiety after the rehearsal dinner. "Today's the day, Anak," my mother said, squeezing my hand as the makeup artist worked on her face. "No more hiding after today." "Thank goodness," I sighed. "I'm tired of Vanessa's games." My maid of honor, Lucia, rolled her eyes. "That woman is something else. Did you see her quizzing the bartender about the quality of the champagne last night, as if she's paying for it?" We laughed, and for a while I forgot about Vanessa as we prepared for the ceremony. My dress, a custom creation that honored my Filipino heritage with delicate embroidery and a modern silhouette, was everything I'd dreamed of. My hair was swept up with my grandmother's antique pins, tiny pearls and jade pieces that had been in our family for generations. Around my neck, the turquoise pendant caught the light. "You look like a princess," Sophie, Vanessa's daughter and our reluctant flower girl, whispered when she saw me. Despite her mother's attitude, the 7-year-old had been sweet throughout the process. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said, kneeling carefully to her level. "And you look beautiful too. Are you ready for your important job?" She nodded solemnly, clutching her basket of rose petals. "Mommy says I have to do it perfect or everyone will be disappointed." My heart sank at the pressure Vanessa was putting on her child. "You know what? The most important thing is that you enjoy yourself. If you spill some petals or forget something, it doesn't matter. We'll all still be smiling." Sophie's eyes widened. "Really?" Mommy said. "What's going on here?" Vanessa's voice cut through the moment as she entered the bridal suite without knocking. She was already fully dressed in her matron of honor gown, not the sage green we'd selected for the bridal party, but a champagne color that was dangerously close to white. "Sophie, don't wrinkle your dress by kneeling." The little girl jumped up immediately, her face falling. "She was just telling me how excited she is," I said, standing up as well. Vanessa gave me a thin smile. "Ellie, shouldn't you be finishing your makeup? The photographer wants some shots before the ceremony, and you're nowhere near ready." I checked the delicate watch on my wrist, a gift from Daniel that morning. "We're right on schedule, actually. The photographer isn't due for another 40 minutes. "Oh, didn't anyone tell you? I moved it up. He's already here, waiting downstairs." My mother stepped forward, her usually gentle demeanor hardening. "You changed the schedule without consulting the bride? On her wedding day?" Vanessa barely glanced at her. "It made more sense logistically. The light is better now, and this way we won't be rushed before the ceremony." "The schedule was carefully planned," I said, fighting to keep my voice even. "Please don't make any more changes without talking to me first." "I'm only trying to help," Vanessa said with exaggerated patience. "Someone needs to ensure this wedding meets the appropriate standards, and clearly," her eyes swept over my half-finished appearance, "you need the assistance." My mother muttered something in Tagalog that made my cousin snort with laughter. "What was that?" Vanessa asked sharply. "She said you're very helpful," my cousin lied smoothly. What my mother had actually said translated roughly to "that woman has the manners of a rabid goat." "Well, at least someone appreciates my efforts," Vanessa sniffed. "Come along, Sophie. Let's leave the bride to finish getting ready. Whenever you're done, Ellie, we'll be waiting. Try not to take too long. The Miller family guests are quite punctual." As the door closed behind them, the room erupted. "The nerves. Did you see that dress? It's practically white. Someone needs to put her in her place." "Enough," I said firmly. "Let's not let her ruin this day. In a few hours, I'll be married to Daniel, and everyone will know the truth. That's all that matters." My mother looked at me with pride. "You've always been the bigger person, Eleanor, but remember, even saints have their limits." The ceremony was set for 4 p.m., time to catch the golden afternoon light filtering through the garden's ancient trees. By 3:30, I was fully ready, photographs completed, despite Vanessa's attempts to direct the photographer to focus more on her and Sophie, and waiting in the garden cottage that served as our staging area. Through the window, I could see guests being seated, over 300 people, a mix of our families, friends, and yes, some strategic connections. I spotted my grandfather, regal in his wheelchair, being positioned at the end of the front row for optimal viewing. Daniel's parents were greeting guests warmly, his father's initial stiffness from the rehearsal dinner apparently forgotten. Then I saw her, Vanessa, ostensibly helping to seat people but really parading up and down the aisle, stopping to chat with the most influential guests, clearly reveling in her perceived importance. A knock at the door interrupted my observations. My father entered, handsome in his tuxedo, his eyes suspiciously bright when he saw me. "You look just like your grandmother on her wedding day," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She would have been so proud." "Thank you, Papa," I said, blinking back tears of my own. My grandmother had passed 2 years earlier, and I felt her absence keenly today. "Are you ready?" he asked, offering his arm. I took a deep breath and nodded, more than ready. As we lined up for the processional, I could hear the string quartet playing the piece we'd selected, a classical arrangement of a traditional Filipino love song. My bridesmaids proceeded one by one, then little Sophie, who looked terrified but managed to scatter her petals with determined precision. Finally, it was our turn. My father and I paused at the entrance to the garden aisle, and all the guests rose to their feet. At the end of the aisle, Daniel waited, his face lighting up when he saw me. Nothing else mattered in that moment, not Vanessa, not the guests, not even the secret that would soon be revealed. Just Daniel, looking at me like I was the only person in the world. We began our walk down the aisle, my father's arm steady beneath my hand. We were about halfway to the altar when I noticed Vanessa, standing not with the other bridesmaids, but slightly apart, her expression thunderous as she watched the guests' admiring reactions to my entrance. As we passed her, I heard her whisper, loud enough for those nearby to hear, but disguised as a comment to the guest beside her. "God, I can't believe Daniel's actually going through with this. Marrying trash from the east side. Our family will never live it down." The words hit me like a physical blow. I faltered slightly, my step hitching. My father's hand tightened on mine, and he shot a glare in Vanessa's direction that could have frozen fire. A ripple of shocked murmurs spread from those who'd heard. Daniel's mother, in the front row, turned to look back at her daughter with horror. Even little Sophie, standing with the bridesmaids, looked confused and embarrassed by her mother's words. For a moment, I considered stopping, turning to face Vanessa and finally revealing who I really was. The temptation to see her face crumble with realization was almost overwhelming. But then I met Daniel's eyes again. He hadn't heard what was said, but he could tell something had happened. His expression was questioning, concerned. I gave him a small, reassuring smile and continued walking. This was our moment, and I wouldn't let Vanessa taint it any further. When we reached the altar, my father placed my hand in Daniel's, leaning in to whisper something in his ear that made Daniel nod solemnly. Then Papa kissed my cheek and stepped back. "You okay?" Daniel murmured as we turned to face the officiant. "I am now," I whispered back, and I meant it. The ceremony proceeded beautifully. We exchanged the vows we'd written ourselves, promising to support each other's dreams, to build a life of purpose and meaning together, to choose each other every day. When Daniel slipped the ring onto my finger, a beautiful band that had been redesigned using stones from both our families, his hands were steady and sure. "By the power vested in me," the officiant finally declared, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." The garden erupted in applause as Daniel kissed me, wrapping his arms around me as if he'd never let go. When we turned to face our guests as a married couple, I caught sight of Vanessa's face, sour and tight despite her attempt at a smile. "Ready for the reception?" Daniel asked as we prepared to walk back down the aisle. I squeezed his hand. "More than ready. It's time everyone knew exactly who they've been dealing with." Little did Vanessa know, her moment of cruelty during the processional had only strengthened my resolve to make the coming revelation as public and as satisfying as possible. The cocktail hour following our ceremony was held in the garden's West Pavilion, a stunning glass structure overlooking the rose gardens. While Daniel and I finished taking photos, guests mingled over champagne and passed hors d'oeuvres, the string quartet providing elegant background music. When we finally made our entrance as Mr. and Mrs. Miller, the room erupted in applause. I caught sight of Vanessa near the bar, already on what appeared to be her second glass of champagne, her husband looking uncomfortable beside her as she gestured emphatically while talking to a small group of guests. "I think she's still trying to do damage control," Daniel murmured, following my gaze. "Mom told me what she said during the processional. I'm so sorry, Ellie." "Don't be," I replied, squeezing his hand. "It'll all be worth it soon." We made our rounds, greeting guests and accepting congratulations. When we reached my grandfather, he took my hand in his weathered one, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "Ready for the fireworks, Eleanor?" he asked, his voice low but strong despite his 92 years. "More than ready, Grandpa," I assured him. "Good," he patted my hand. "Some lessons need to be taught publicly. Your grandmother would have approved after she finished giving that woman a piece of her mind." I laughed, knowing it was true. My late grandmother had been a force of nature, never hesitating to stand up to anyone who crossed her family. As cocktail hour wound down, guests began moving to the main reception tent for dinner. The space was transformed exactly as we'd envisioned. Tables adorned with the wildflower centerpieces I'd insisted on, soft lighting from hundreds of candles and bistro lights strung overhead, and floor-length linens in a shade of blue that matched the twilight sky visible through the tent's clear panels. Vanessa, I noticed, was scanning the room with a critical eye, no doubt looking for flaws to comment on later. Her gaze lingered on the head table, where place cards indicated that my parents would indeed be seated with Daniels, as we'd originally planned. Dinner service began smoothly. The menu we'd selected, a fusion of Filipino dishes and American classics, was executed perfectly. I watched with satisfaction as guests exclaimed over the pancit, kare-kare, and other traditional dishes from my heritage, served alongside prime rib and local seafood options. Throughout the meal, I could feel Vanessa's eyes on me, her expression growing increasingly pinched as she observed the obvious appreciation guests had for our carefully planned details she'd tried so hard to change. Finally, as dessert was being served, the moment arrived. The mayor of our city, a longtime family friend who had agreed to keep my identity quiet until this moment, stood and gently tapped his glass for attention. The room gradually quieted, all eyes turning to the distinguished man in his formal attire, his mayoral chain of office glinting in the candlelight. "Friends, family, honored guests," he began, his resonant voice carrying easily through the tent. "It is my great privilege to be here tonight celebrating the union of Daniel Miller and Eleanor Hayes." He paused, smiling warmly at us. Or perhaps I should say, Eleanor Hayes Miller, because while many of you know the bride simply as Ellie, some of you may be surprised to learn her full identity. I felt Daniel squeeze my hand under the table as a murmur of interest rippled through the crowd. Across the room, Vanessa had gone very still, her champagne glass frozen halfway to her lips. "Eleanor," the mayor continued, "is the granddaughter of Richard and Lucia Hayes, founders of Hayes Industries and the Hayes Foundation. She is, in her own right, the current CEO of the Hayes Foundation and a director of Hayes Industries, overseeing their philanthropic initiatives across our city and beyond." The murmuring grew louder. I saw several guests turn to look at my grandfather, who was beaming with pride from his place at the family table. "For those who don't know," the mayor added with a twinkle in his eye, "the Hayes family is responsible for building the Children's Hospital wing where Daniel and Eleanor first met, the restoration of our city's historic district, and yes," he gestured around us, "the preservation of these very gardens where we celebrate tonight." The look on Vanessa's face was everything I'd imagined and more. Her complexion had gone from flush to ashen in seconds, her eyes wide with shock and dawning horror. "In fact," the mayor continued, clearly enjoying himself now, "the East Side neighborhood that Eleanor calls home is where the Hayes family has maintained their primary residence for 3 generations, despite their success. It's a testament to their commitment to community and their refusal to forget their roots." At this, several guests turned to look directly at Vanessa, whose earlier comment during the processional had apparently circulated widely. She seemed to shrink in her seat, her husband staring at her with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. "I've known Eleanor since she was a little girl with skinned knees and big dreams," the mayor said, his tone softening. I've watched her grow into a woman of extraordinary compassion, integrity, and humility, qualities that clearly drew Daniel to her, as he had the wisdom to see beyond superficial matters to the true worth of the woman he was falling in love with. He raised his glass high. So I invite you all to join me in toasting not just their marriage, but the union of two people who understand that real value lies not in names or net worth, but in character and kindness. To Daniel and Eleanor. To Daniel and Eleanor, the room echoed, glasses raising in unison. As applause filled the tent, Daniel leaned over to kiss me softly. "That was worth the wait," he whispered against my lips. "It really was," I agreed, unable to suppress my smile. Across the room, Vanessa had set down her glass and was whispering frantically to her husband, who appeared to be having none of it. Several nearby guests were giving her a wide berth, their expressions making it clear they'd heard about her behavior. As if sensing she was being watched, Vanessa looked up and met my eyes directly for the first time since the mayor's speech. For a moment, naked panic flashed across her face. Then, to my surprise, she stood abruptly and began making her way toward our table. Daniel tensed beside me. "What is she doing?" "I'm not sure," I admitted, watching her approach with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. Vanessa reached our table, her composure clearly hanging by a thread. Eleanor, may I speak with you privately?" "Anything you have to say to my wife, you can say right here," Daniel said firmly. Vanessa swallowed hard, her eyes darting between us and the nearby guests who were watching the exchange with undisguised interest. I owe you an apology," she finally managed, the words seeming to physically pain her. I've made assumptions that were clearly incorrect." "Yes, you have," I agreed calmly, "about many things." She flinched slightly at my directness. "I never meant to, that is, if I'd known who you really were." "That's exactly the problem, isn't it?" I interrupted, keeping my voice gentle but firm. "You believed I deserved respect only if I came from the right family or had the right connections. That's not how respect works, Vanessa." She had the grace to look ashamed, though I suspected it was more from being publicly wrong than from genuine remorse. "You're right," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "I've been terrible and I'm sorry." Before I could respond, a small voice piped up from beside us. "Mommy, why did you say Aunt Ellie was trash?" We all turned to see Sophie standing there, her flower girl dress slightly rumpled from playing with the other children, her expression confused and hurt. Vanessa went rigid with mortification. "Sophie, that's not what I." "But you did," the little girl insisted. "During the wedding, I heard you, and now everyone's saying Aunt Ellie is actually super important and rich. Were you wrong, Mommy?" The brutal innocence of the child's question hung in the air between us. Around us, conversations had hushed as people strained to hear the exchange. Vanessa looked trapped, her carefully constructed facade crumbling under her daughter's honest question. I took pity on her then, kneeling down to Sophie's level. "Your mommy and I had a misunderstanding, sweetheart, but what's important is that people aren't trash or important because of how much money they have or what their last name is. They're important because of how they treat others. Do you understand?" Sophie nodded solemnly. "Like how you made Lily a special bridesmaid when she was sad about not being the flower girl." "Exactly like that," I agreed, touched that she'd noticed. "And is Mommy in trouble?" Sophie asked, glancing worriedly at her mother. I looked up at Vanessa, whose face was now flushed with a mixture of shame and gratitude for my intervention. "No, she's not in trouble," I said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes too. The important thing is that we learn from them." I stood, smoothing my dress, and addressed Vanessa directly. "We're family now. That means something to me, even if we've had a rocky start. I hope we can begin again, on equal footing this time." I extended my hand to her, not in submission or forgiveness exactly, but as an offer of a clean slate. After a moment's hesitation, she took it. "Thank you," she whispered, and for once I believed she meant it. As she led Sophie away, Daniel wrapped his arm around my waist. "That was incredibly gracious of you." "It wasn't just for her," I admitted. "It was for Sophie and for us. I don't want to begin our marriage with lingering resentment." "That's why I love you," he said, kissing my temple. "That and about a million other reasons." The band began playing then, announcing our first dance. As Daniel led me to the center of the floor, I caught sight of my grandfather giving me an approving nod and my parents watching with unmistakable pride. As we swayed to the music, Daniel holding me close, he whispered, "Was it worth it? Keeping your identity secret all this time?" I thought about the journey that had brought us here, the genuine connection we'd formed without the distraction of my family name, the lessons Vanessa had been forced to learn, and yes, the admittedly satisfying moment of revelation. "Absolutely worth it," I told him, resting my head on his shoulder. "Some truths are more powerful when they're revealed at exactly the right moment." Around us, our guests watched, their faces reflecting joy, amusement, and in Vanessa's case, a newfound humility that I hoped might last beyond this evening. Whatever happened next, we would face it together, with the truth finally out in the open and nothing left to hide. As the dance ended and applause surrounded us, I caught Vanessa's eye across the room. She raised her glass slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement if not quite apology. I nodded in return, accepting the truce. Some lessons are best learned publicly, my grandfather had said. And judging by the whispers still circulating and the way guests were now giving Vanessa a wide berth, this was one lesson she wouldn't soon forget. The remainder of our wedding reception unfolded like a dream, the kind where everything falls perfectly into place despite earlier chaos. The band played our carefully curated playlist, guests danced until their feet ached, and the sparkler send-off as we departed remains one of my most treasured memories. Hundreds of tiny lights, illuminating the faces of those we loved most in the world. Daniel and I left for our honeymoon the next morning, 2 weeks in the Philippines, where I showed him the villages my mother's family came from, followed by a week in Japan that had been on his bucket list forever. Away from the drama and revelations, we had time to process everything that had happened and to begin our marriage in peace. "Do you regret any of it?" Daniel asked one evening as we sat on our private balcony overlooking the ocean in Palawan. "Keeping your identity secret for so long, letting Vanessa treat you that way?" I considered the question carefully, swirling the ice in my drink. "I don't regret keeping my identity private when we first met," I said finally. "That gave us the chance to build something real without my family name or wealth getting in the way." "And Vanessa," he prompted. I sighed. "That's more complicated. Part of me wishes I'd stood up to her sooner, drawn clearer boundaries. But another part knows that the public revelation was more effective than anything I could have said privately." "She needed the humbling," Daniel agreed. "Though I'm still angry about what she said during the processional, that was unforgivable." "Maybe not unforgivable," I mused, "but certainly unforgettable, and maybe that's the point. She'll remember that moment and its consequences for the rest of her life." We returned from our honeymoon to find several developments waiting for us. First, a handwritten letter from Vanessa delivered to our home rather than sent electronically, a sign of effort I hadn't expected. "Dear Eleanor and Daniel, *. There is no adequate way to express how deeply ashamed I am of my behavior leading up to and during your wedding. My actions were inexcusable, born from my own insecurities and misplaced values. Eleanor, I judged you based on assumptions that were not only wrong, but reflected poorly on my character, not yours. I treated you with disrespect you never deserved, regardless of your family name or position. Daniel, I failed you as a sister. Instead of supporting your happiness, I tried to undermine it because it didn't fit my narrow vision of what I thought was best for our family. I am seeking therapy to address the issues that led me to behave so shamefully. Sophie has also been asking difficult questions that have forced me to examine the values I'm passing on to her. I don't expect immediate forgiveness, nor do I deserve it. But I hope that with time and consistent effort on my part, we might build a new relationship based on mutual respect. With sincere regret and hope for the future. Vanessa *. Do you believe her? Daniel asked after we'd both read it. I believe she's genuinely embarrassed, I said carefully. Whether that translates to real change remains to be seen, but it's a start. The second development was more amusing. Vanessa's husband, Thomas, had sent Daniel a text apologizing for not intervening sooner and explaining that he'd had no idea how badly Vanessa had been behaving. Apparently, the public revelation and subsequent fallout had prompted some serious conversations in their household. Thomas said they're in couples counseling, Daniel told me, showing me the message, and that he's made it clear their marriage depends on her making real changes. Good for him, I said, genuinely pleased. I'd always liked Thomas and had wondered how much he knew about his wife's behavior. The third and most surprising development came from Sophie. She had created a handmade card, decorated with glitter and drawings, that read, "I'm sorry my mommy was mean. Can we still be friends? Love, Sophie." Inside was a child's drawing of what appeared to be Sophie and me holding hands, with a rainbow overhead. It broke my heart a little to think of how confused she must have been by the adult drama swirling around our wedding. I called her immediately, assuring her that we would always be friends and arranging for her to visit us the following weekend. When she arrived, clutching a small backpack and looking nervous, I made sure she knew that none of what happened was her fault. Adults make mistakes sometimes, I told her as we baked cookies together in our kitchen. Big ones, but that doesn't mean we don't love each other. Mommy cried a lot after your wedding, Sophie confided, carefully placing chocolate chips on her cookie dough. And Daddy was really mad, but they're better now. Mommy says she's learning to be kinder. That's very brave of her, I said, meaning it. It takes courage to admit when you're wrong and try to do better. Sophie looked up at me with those innocent eyes that saw everything so clearly. She was wrong about you being trash. You're the opposite of trash. You're like treasure. I laughed, touched by her childish but profound assessment. Thank you, Sophie. I think you're treasure too. Over the following months, we established a new normal with Daniel's family. His parents, mortified by Vanessa's behavior, had been almost excessively welcoming to me, until I gently assured them that I didn't hold them responsible for their daughter's actions. She's an adult who made her own choices, I told them over dinner at their home. And she's taking steps to make amends. That's all any of us can ask. Vanessa herself was making visible efforts. She was quieter at family gatherings, more thoughtful in her comments, and had stopped name-dropping or flaunting designer labels. Once, I overheard her correcting a friend who made a classist remark about another mother at Sophie's school, which gave me hope that her change might be genuine. 6 months after our wedding, we invited Daniel's entire family, including Vanessa and Thomas, to a dinner at our home, the Hayes family estate that Vanessa had never seen. I watched her eyes widen as they drove through the gates and up the long driveway lined with ancient oak trees, taking in the historic mansion that had been in my family for generations. "This is where you grew up?" she asked quietly as I gave them a tour. "Part-time," I explained. "We split our time between here and the East Side house, where my grandmother insisted on staying. She believed in remaining connected to the community where Hayes Industries began as a small machine shop 80 years ago." "I had no idea," Vanessa murmured, looking genuinely abashed as she took in the family portraits, the antiques, the obvious history surrounding us. "There's a lot you didn't know about me," I said without rancor. "But that goes both ways. I'm still learning about you too, Vanessa." She met my eyes then, and I saw something new there, not the calculation or insecurity of before, but a genuine desire to understand. "I'd like to change that, if you're willing." Dinner that night wasn't perfect. There were still awkward moments and old patterns that threatened to emerge, but it was a beginning. Sophie and Daniel's parents helped bridge the gaps, and by dessert, we were sharing stories and even laughing together. As they were leaving, Vanessa pulled me aside. "I want you to know I'm not just doing this for appearances," she said quietly. "The therapy is helping me see things I couldn't before, about myself, about why I valued the things I did." "I'm glad," I told her sincerely. "Not because I needed your apology, but because that kind of insight makes life better for you and everyone around you." She nodded, blinking rapidly. "I don't deserve a second chance with you and Daniel, but I'm grateful for it." "Family is complicated," I said, thinking of my own family's journey. "But it's also resilient when we choose to make it so." Later that night, as Daniel and I prepared for bed, he asked, "Do you think she's really changed?" "I think she's trying," I said thoughtfully, "and that's a start. Real change takes time." "You're remarkably forgiving," he observed, pulling me close. I'm not sure I could be so gracious if someone had treated my family that way. It's not just forgiveness, I explained. It's pragmatism. We're going to be family for the rest of our lives. Holding on to resentment would only poison that. My wise wife, he murmured, kissing my forehead. Besides, I added with a small smile, there's a certain satisfaction in taking the high road. My grandmother always said, living well is the best revenge. And are we living well? Daniel asked, his eyes crinkling at the corners. I thought about our life together, the love we shared, the work we both found meaningful, the family we were building on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect. The contrast between the values Vanessa had once prioritized, status, appearances, social climbing, and what truly mattered in life. The very best, I assured him, leaning in for a kiss. 1 year after our wedding, we gathered again, this time for a vow renewal ceremony for Daniel's parents' 40th anniversary. Vanessa had taken the lead in planning it, consulting everyone respectfully and staying within the parameters the anniversary couple had requested. As I watched her coordinate with vendors, double-checking details without micromanaging, I realized how far she'd come. The woman who had once tried to remake our wedding in her image was now honoring others' wishes and finding satisfaction in supporting rather than controlling. During the reception, as Sophie twirled on the dance floor with her grandfather, Vanessa approached me with 2 glasses of champagne. A peace offering, she said, handing me one, and a thank you. For what? I asked, accepting the glass. For the lesson, she said simply. It wasn't easy to learn, but it was necessary. You could have exposed me much more harshly, made sure I was completely humiliated. You had every right to, but you showed restraint and grace even after everything I did. I considered her words. The goal was never to humiliate you, Vanessa, just to establish the truth. The truth, she repeated thoughtfully, that what matters isn't what people have, but who they are. Exactly. She raised her glass slightly. To truth, then, and second chances. To truth and second chances, I agreed, clinking my glass against hers. Across the room, Daniel caught my eye and smiled, the same smile that had first drawn me to him when we were just 2 people painting hospital murals, before names and family connections and wedding drama. The smile that reminded me why all of it, the secrecy, the revelation, even Vanessa's painful learning curve, had been worthwhile. Because in the end, we had built something true, and no amount of money, status, or social positioning could ever be more valuable than that.
Eleanor, thank you for sharing your story with us today. What you experienced was truly painful, but your response reveals a powerful truth. Sometimes the most devastating justice isn't confrontation, but allowing people to discover their own prejudices in the most public way possible. This isn't about revenge. It's about creating moments of transformation that ripple through families for generations, especially for children like Sophie who learn what true dignity looks like. I'm Eliza Quinn, and remember, here on Wedding Day Justice, veils off, justice on.